the meeting here. It's a little after 7:30. So welcome everybody to the Hyde Park Historical Society, where program tonight is on Gwendolyn Brooks, and we are very lucky to have Nora Brooks Blakely, Gwendolyn Brooks' daughter, here to talk about her mother and her poetry. In the chat are some links to, one of the links is to a reading of a poem that Nora is going to address tonight, which is one of her mother's most iconic poems, and it's called We Real Cool, and Nora's going to talk about that. We also have a link to an article by Christian Bellinger in the Hyde Park Herald on Gwendolyn Brooks's husband, Henry Blakely, who was also a poet. So there's a link to that. And finally, there's a link to the life and works of Gwendolyn Brooks at www.gwendolynbrooks.net, which Nora administers. And now we're going to get going. I would like you to welcome all of you to the Hyde Park Book Club, sponsored by the Hyde Park Historical Society in the Chicago Hyde Park Village. Tonight we are discussing the works of Gwendolyn Brooks with her daughter, Nora Brooks Blakely. Before I go any further, I would like to say that the Hyde Park Historical Society has ties to Gwendolyn Brooks. Back in 2000, we awarded her our Cornell Award for contributions to the literary and cultural heritage of Hyde Park and Chicago's South Side. She very graciously gave the Society signed copies of several of her works, including this particular book called Children Coming Home. Now, I showed this to Nora the other day, and she said, oh my gosh, I worked with this, my mother and I collaborated on this book. I designed the cover, I did the typesetting for it, and it was published, it was self-published by Gwendolyn and Nora. So certainly Gwendolyn and Nora had a partnership that was wonderful, and we're going to hear about some of that tonight. And I just mentioned we have several links in chat to some of the stories, and now I'm going to introduce Nora, who is going to guide us through the life and works of Gwendolyn Brooks. Nora Brooks Blakely is a former teacher in the Chicago Public Schools. She founded a theater company called Chocolate Chips Theater Company, which I love anything called chocolate chips. She was its primary playwright. Ms. Blakely is the daughter of two writers, Henry Blakely and Gwendolyn Brooks. She founded Brooks Permissions in 2001. The company licenses and promotes her mother's work and develops programming and publications which demonstrate Gwendolyn Brooks' continuing relevance. Nora's first picture book, Moya Dina, and I'm sorry, but Nora, if I mispronounced that, Moradina and the Golden Heart is an origin tale for Kwanzaa. It will be released this fall. So now I turn you over to Nora Blakely.
Hello, everyone. I'm glad to be here this evening.
Hello to you.
I'm doing fine, and I thought I'd like to actually start out with I had talked to Michael about pictures, and I was going through some of the pictures that I thought that I would do. I'm not, but I'm going to do a little show and tell of other pictures instead, which I think will actually be of more interest to you. So, so let me go in here, do that whole little dance that you have to do to get to the pictures. And okay. I hope, there we go. Okay. Thank you for your patience. Okay, so this is my favorite picture of my mother, and it was taken by the Seattle Times. The next picture is looking at our family, and so that is my great grandmother, and that is the whole Topeka story. Some people thought that my mother was part of the whole process of everybody moving from the south to the north, but that was not the case. My grandparents had actually already lived in Chicago, but my grandmother wanted to go back and be with her mother, so that for the birth of her first child, and that is Lavinia Wims. And I think that her hands, if you can see them, are just pure sculpture. You know, that this is a woman who worked and moved things. So, so that is my mother and her mother. So then it seemed to, but that is my mother at the age of 2 with her younger brother, Raymond. And that is their childhood home. And when we get to talking about a poem called A Song in the Front Yard later, then you can picture this as being her front yard, and the poem is very much a reality for of her life. So that also means, though, that that's the backyard that she wanted to go to, that she wanted to get to in the poem. So I was really excited about Christian Ballinger. I hope I'm pronouncing his last name correctly. The article that he did, That Is My Father. There's a family joke that there are actually 3 people in this picture, because this was 1940 at Easter, and my brother was born in October of 1940. So that's a little glimpse of my father, Henry Blakely, who wrote Windy Place that Christian Ballinger talked about. And that's the 2 of us. And if you are, some people really like to go out and see headstones and stuff in cemeteries. If any of you fall into that category, my mother and father are buried at Lincoln Cemetery with a lot of my relatives on my mother's side as well. And this is the tombstone that I had created for her. And that is the side of it. And that is the back of it. And last but not least, now in Brooks Park on 46 and, oh good heavens, what is that? It's not Woodlawn. It's, I'm blanking on the street. Is the statue that Margot McMahon did of my mother. And you'll see in the back, there's a little porch and stuff, because she wanted people to be able to come out and also read poetry. And there's a lattice there where you could actually tie your poems to the lattice if you so chose. So I wanted to just give you a little bit of that tour through through Motherland, and give you a chance. So now that you've had that pictorial background, I wanted to talk, of course, about my mother's writing. And although her work has been honored countless times and is deeply respected, in fact, to some extent revered, there is still a tendency to focus far more on the first half of her writing career, while paying much less attention to her second act or the reasons for the shift. Part of my commitment to my mother's legacy is to build a better balance between the two. So I did, however, want to take a quick look at the first half, because I'm certainly not saying that that work should be dismissed. That period is filled with vitally important visions into the world and insights into my mother's life and priorities. And the work is still amazingly relevant, sometimes almost frighteningly so. So here are 3 quotes and 2 poems from her first books. A quote from Kitchenette Building. "We are things of dry hours and the involuntary plan, grayed in and gray. Dream makes a giddy sound, not strong, like rent, feet life, satisfying a man." And early in their marriage, my parents lived in a kitchenette building. And of course, she also worked in the Mecca building, which also had kitchenettes. From Annie Allen, the book that won the Pulitzer Prize, 2 quotes. One is "The Children of the Poor." And this quote just has such luscious, luxurious language for a tragic, tragic situation. "What shall I give my children who are poor, who are judged the least wise of the land, who are my sweetest lepers, who demand no velvet and no velvety velour, but who have begged me for a brisk contour?" And also from Annie Allen, a quote from the womanhood section. This is poem 15 in the womanhood section. And these are also the last lines in the book. And I have been quoting these all throughout 2020 because I feel that these lines, which were written back in 48 or 49, speak to everything that we've been going through over the past year and a half. Excuse me. "Rise, let us combine. There are no magics or elves or timely godmothers to guide us. We are lost, must wizard a track through our own screaming weed." And so screaming weed is kind of how I define 2020 and 2021. So the poems I wanted to read you from that period are very different from each other. And one is the one speaking directly to my mother's own childhood, and that is "A Song in the Front Yard." So please cast your mind back to the 2 pictures that you saw, the front yard and the backyard where she lived. She was about 19 in that picture that was taken of her in the backyard. I've always loved this poem, and it became the first of 2 issues so far that Brooks Mentions has done a series called Graphic Gwendolyn. It's an illustrated poetry series, and this is what it looks like on the cover. And so in effect, it is taking my mother's work and putting it in a comic book format. And we've had some good reaction to people who are kind of excited about that idea. This poem, if you like it, is the there's a PDF of this booklet on the website that Michael was kind enough to add in the chat. So in gwendolynbrooks.net. A Song in the Front Yard. "I stayed in the front yard all my life. I want to peek at the back, where it's rough and untended and hungry weed grows. A girl gets sick of a rose. I want to go in the backyard now, and maybe down the alley to where the charity children play. I want a good time today. They do some wonderful things. They have some wonderful fun. My mother sneers, but I say it's fine how they don't have to go in at 8:45. My mother, she tells me that Johnny May will grow up to be a bad woman. That George will be taken to jail sooner or late. On account of last winter, he sold our back gate, but I say it's fine. Honest, I do. And I'd like to be a bad woman too, and wear the brave stockings of night black lace and strut down the streets with paint on my face. So the other poem from that period is, of course, We Real Cool. It's probably the poem that my mother is best known for. It was published in the Bean Eaters in 1960, and both it and A Song in the Front Yard you can find in the larger collection, Blacks, which is, if you've seen that one, you may have seen the pictures. So, and I think I froze. Oh dear. Did I freeze?
No, you're fine.
Okay.
Yeah, you're good.
So yes. So, but Blacks has all of these poems in it. And so the poem is based on a pool hall a couple of blocks from our home at 7428 South Evans. That was my childhood home. And that house is now a Chicago landmark. So my mother was walking down the street and she saw this pool hall and looked in, and she saw these young boys, and it was during school time. So she wondered about what their lives were like, what their stories were. And so she worked on this poem. The pool hall was not called the Golden Shovel. There, she states 7, but there could have been any number of boys in there. That's not necessarily the number that she saw. So, so she proceeded to write this poem. Now, what she has said about the poem is that she, to quote her, it's not that she doesn't like the poem, but that it would be nice if anthologizers could find a different poem occasionally that she had written to include in their anthologies. There was also the controversy that at one point, the phrase Jazz June was defined as, some people decided that it had sexual content, and so in some places the poem was banned. And my mother, and I quote her, said that that was not her intent, but if it helped anybody, that she was fine with. So she also read the poem in a particular way. She read it the way that it's written, where the we breaks off, because she saw it as these young men beginning to reach their last gasp of breath, going for their last gasp of breath in their lives. And so here it is. We real cool, the pool players, 7 at the Golden Shovel. We real cool, we left school, we lurk late, we strike straight, we sing sin, we then gin, we Jazz June, we die soon. Okay. And I have to ask a question, because on my end, my picture is frozen. Is that true for you all, or can you see me moving around? Oh,
We
great.
can see
As
you.
long as you can see me moving around, I'm fine.
I can see you.
I don't have to see me. So, so at this point, we pause here for a special announcement, because I think this is the perfect place to pause and tell you a little bit about life at home. By fall of 1967, I was 16 years old. And life then and life before and life at home after was always infused with Mama writing. She talked to me about her poetry. She frequently wrote and always typed at the dining room table. In her bedroom, there was a marble-topped nightstand that always had a notepad on it. Across from the nightstand, what was supposed to be a closet housed a TV. The news, the PBS shows Nova and Masterpiece Theater, sitcoms and dramas, you name it. And my mother wrote comments about it or jotted down notes of ideas that came to her as she watched voraciously. But I don't want to paint a picture of a woman obsessed, exactly, because she had a different obsession, and that was soap operas. From the time I was an itty bitty sitting in her lap to the time I was grown enough to have my own chair, and on beyond that, she loved soap operas. The Guiding Light, As the World Turns, Days of Our Lives, and in later years, All My Children. About All My Children. One time, as an adult, I wasn't paying attention to the time, and I called her during AMC. She picked up the phone, said, "All My Children," and hung up. She didn't have caller ID, but I'm pretty sure it wouldn't have made a difference even if she did. So, and now back to our previously scheduled presentation. And Beyond, 1967. In 1967, things changed. It wasn't overnight. There were people she had met before 1967 that became a significant part of her second act. There were poems she had previously written that proved this new commitment wasn't as thoroughly new as some people might think. But in 1967, she had the opportunity to sit down and listen to writing peers and students, because that was when Gwendolyn Brooks went to the Fisk University Writers Conference, inaugurated by the author John Killens the year before. George Kent, a biographer of my mother's, who wrote A Life of Gwendolyn Brooks, said she was coming to Fisk at a time when the highly tense confrontation between literature and civil rights had transformed itself into a pronounced nationalistic concern with literature and the Black writer's role. She heard the author John Killens challenge an audience saying, "For too long we have looked into the eyes of the white master for an image of ourselves." She heard actor and playwright Ossie Davis call for the development of a new language and a new image through which Blacks must overcome being made the expendables of America, to create images relating to the man in the gutter and capable of appealing to him. And that was a period that began this program, which continues on to this day, where a lot of writers started reading their works at prisons, bars, and out on the street. She heard playwright Ron Milner say, "If a new Black theater is to be born, sustain itself, and justify its own being, it must go home. Go home psychically, mentally, aesthetically, and I think physically." George Kent further defined this as the theater showing the community its victimization and stubbornly retained beauty. And to that, Gwendolyn Brooks said, "You may use any label that you wish. All I know is when young people started talking about Blacks loving, respecting, and helping one another, that was enough for me." And so Mama went home and took a new look and a new tilt at what she always did best. You see, people were always her concern, her focus. This poem is from 1992, but it speaks to her direction from 1967 forward. It's called An Old Black Woman, Homeless and Indistinct. Your every day is a pilgrimage, a blue hubbub. Your days are collected bacchanals of fear and self-troubling. And your nights, when you put you down an alley or cardboard or viaduct, your lovers are rats finding your secret places. When you rise in another morning, you hit the street, your incessant enemy. See, here you are in the so busy world. You walk, you walk, you pass the people. No, the people pass you. Here's a rich girl marching briskly to her charms. She is swayed and scarf and belting and perfume. She sees you not. She sees you very well. At 5 in the afternoon, Miss Rich Girl will go home to brooms and vacuum cleaner and carpeting, 2 cats, 2 marble top tables, 2 telephones, shiny green peppers, flowers in impudent vases, visitors. Before all that, there's luncheon to be known. Lasagna, lobster salad, sandwiches. All day, there's coffee to be loved. There are luxuries of minor dissatisfaction, luxuries of plan. That's her story. You're going to vanish, not necessarily nicely, fairly soon. Although essentially dignity itself, a death is not necessarily tidy, modest, or discreet. When they find you, your legs may not be tidy, nor aligned. Your mouth may be all crooked or destroyed. Black old woman, homeless, indistinct. Your last and least adventure is review. Folks used to celebrate your birthday. Folks used to say, she's such a pretty little thing. Folks used to say, she draws such handsome horses, cows, and houses. Folks used to say, that child is going far. Mama took a look to the future and defined her position when she stated this was not a rhyme time. She put her money where her mouth and mind and pen were. After supporting so many young writers in their decision to work with Black publishers, she felt it would be hypocritical for her to continue with Harper. In the Mecca in 1968 was her last book published by a major corporate house. And in the middle of all this talk about a pivot, In the Mecca holds a special place. GB, which is sometimes what I call her, had worked in the block-long Mecca building several decades ago. That area is now part of the Illinois Tech Campus, formerly the Illinois Institute of Technology. GB toiled over the near book-length poem for many years. And while there are indications a change is going to come in that main piece, it's the poems in the after Mecca section that truly demonstrate her new direction. Poems like The Sermon on the Warpland, with the epigraph, The Fact That We Are Black is Our Ultimate Reality by Ron Karenga. And several strengths from Drowsiness campaigned, but spoke in single sermon on the warpland, and went about the warpland saying, no, my people, Black and Black, revile the river. Say that the river turns and turn the river. Say that our something in double pod contains seeds for the coming hell and health together. Prepare to meet, sisters, brothers, the brash and terrible weather, the pains, the bruising, the collapse of bestials, idols, but then, oh then, the stuffing of the halls, the seasoning of the perilously sweet, the health, the heralding of the clear obscure. Build now your church, my brothers, sisters. Build never with brick, nor quarton, nor with granite. Build with life, love, with love like lion eyes, with love like morning rise, with love like Black, our Black, luminously indiscreet, complete, continuous. So, for a time, my mother also established her own publishing house and named it the David Company in honor of her father. The book Children Coming Home that Michael showed you earlier, a periodical called The Black Position, and the initial edition of Blacks are among the titles produced by her company. In the post-1967 period, my mother's work was often attacked on several fronts, defined as her angry period, although if you read Riders to the Blood Red Wrath, Ballad of Pearl May Lee, or Negro Hero in her earlier books, all also in the compilation Blacks, those poems were every bit as angry as some of her work post-67. Some people said it was pedestrian, no longer lyrical. What is wrong with these people? I don't know what they were reading. So here are some quotes and poems and one essay, which I have selected to address the non-lyrical, insufficient complexity, and just not poetic enough controversies of her post-1967 work. This quote from Jane Addams is special to me because I look at the poem Jane Addams as being an accidental autobiography of my mother's. I think that although she spoke of Jane Addams and what she had done, a lot of it is also about her too. And the quote is, "I shall tell you a thing about giants that you do not wish to know. Giants look in mirrors and see almost nothing at all. But they leave their houses nevertheless. They lurch out of doors to reach you, the other stretchers and strainers." There was a piece that called Thinking of Elizabeth Steinberg. And my mother's strong focus was definitely, without question, her neighborhood, her community, concerns of Black lives, and so forth. But that was not all that she wrote about. And in this quote from Thinking of Elizabeth Steinberg, I don't know how many of you remember that case, but it was in 1987, and it was about a young girl, I think about 6 or 7 years old, who was brutally beaten and by her mother and stepfather, and neglected and abused. And so in this last half of the poem, my mother says, "Tardy tears will not return you to air. But if you are somewhere and sentient, be comforted, little spirit, because of your lean day, the vulgarity of your storm, the erosion and rot of your masters sitting in the sputum of their souls, another Lisa will not die. You help us begin to hear. We begin to hear the scream out of the twisted mouth and out of the eye that strives to be normal. We shall listen. We shall stomp into the horror houses, invade the caves of the monsters, in the name of Elizabeth Steinberg, in the name of Lisa." I'm just going to do a quote from a particular poem because some of these have been very depressing. So I'm not going to do another depressing piece. But Patrick Bowie of Cabrini Green is about a young man who back in the 80s was shot on the street. And if there is anything more contemporary than that in the times that we currently live in, I don't know what it is. But she talks about Patrick Bowie, and at the end of the piece says, "What is devout is never to forget that he was with us for a little while. Our splendor, our creative spirit, our sparkling contribution, our flash of influence interrupted, our interrupted man." Okay. So I'm only going to read two more pieces. And those are, one is the essay I promised. It's not a long essay, don't panic. But this she wrote not that long before she passed. And it's only available in its entirety. It's only available in Seasons, which is the book that Cynthia Walls and I edited for the 2017 100-year centennial of my mother's birth. And so this is called Old. One of the truths I know is that the oldest person is just as alive as the youngest. That sounds simple, but it isn't credited frequently. The fact that custom claims you have 1 year to live and that your neighbor has 20 years to live does not mean you are any less alive than is your neighbor. Does not mean that your enjoyment of the sunshine remaining to you need be poorer in quality than the enjoyment of your neighbor. Does not mean that you need rejoice less than your neighbor rejoices at the friskiness of happy animals, at the warmth, wit, and wonder of children. Often now, I'm the oldest one in a room. It feels a little odd if I'm made aware of it. The fact of it is impressive too. I believe that people my age and people older should continue to involve themselves in the challenges, pains, comforts, and responsibilities of this world. I say to old people, what those other people are doing out there affects you. Act. You can act from a wheelchair or a sick bed. You can act as long as you are alert and moving at all. To act does not mean to gallop necessarily. A grin, a hand clasp, or if you can manage it, a piece of wisdom from the breadth of your impressive experience can operate as important act. You are alive until you are dead. 10 minutes before you're dead, you're alive. You could save the world in 10 minutes. It's a possibility. You are alive until the end of the split second of your death. Bravo! So, the legacy continues. Brooks for Mission's mission statement is demonstrating the continuing relevance of Gwendolyn Brooks, and we've done that through licensing, special projects, and publications like Seasons and the graphic Gwendolyn series. We're also proud to announce a new project for 2022. The GB7 series will be a monthly collaboration with other individuals and organizations who are confirmed Brooksophiles. On the 7th day of each month, we'll look at the life and work of Gwendolyn Brooks, studying different points of view and varying impacts as part of our 360 Degrees of Gwendolyn Brooks concept. People often ask me, what is my favorite poem by my mother? I hate that question, but I'll close with a poem that is always in the top 3. What's more, I think when you look at her canon of work from the very beginning, but especially post-pivot, this poem is much more representative of who she was than We Real Cool. It's a tribute to Paul Robeson and is named Paul Robeson. That time, we all heard it, cool and clear, cutting across the hot grit of the day. The major voice, the adult voice, foregoing rolling river, foregoing tearful tale of bale and barge and other symptoms of an old despond. Warning in music words, devout and large, that we are each other's harvest. We are each other's business. We are each other's magnitude and bond. Thank you.
Nora, that was
Yes.
amazing. I want to thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
think we are all not only amazed, but touched by how much we did not know. As you said, we real cool to find your mother for many years, and yet there was so much more depth there. I mean, that was not to say that that wasn't a wonderful poem, but anyway, I was deeply touched and moved by that, and I want to thank you for that presentation. And now I would like to open this up to questions, and I have the first one. Your mother lived in our building until she died. She was not here all that much. I think she traveled a lot. I certainly never met her. Other people in this building did. But when you said to us just a few minutes ago about old people, you're alive until you die, she was alive right up until the last minute of her life, right?
Yes, yes. In fact, my mother toured from and did lectures, classes, etc., usually from mid-September to mid-June. And then from mid-June to mid-September, she was the hermit that she preferred to be, and would be in her apartment and fundamentally would not go out. So, and that's not hyperbole. I mean, she would not go out. My best friend and cohort in crime for Brooks Permissions, Cynthia Walls, she would have us come in. She would give us grocery lists, and we would go out and we would get her groceries and everything. She fundamentally just didn't leave. She wrote more during that time. She caught up on all of her mail, etc. But she passed December 3rd of 2000, but she did a lecture. She was still on the train traveling to lectures and stuff in September of that year. So, so yes, she was vibrant almost till the very end. And by the way, I saw at least 2 family members come in. So Paulette and Doretha Brooks, my cousins, who are the children of Raymond Brooks, who you saw in the picture of my mother and her brother earlier. So, hey, Paulette, hey, Doretha.
I would like everybody to, especially those of you who have questions, to unmute yourself, because you're all muted now. I did that to keep the noise down while Nora was presenting. But for those of you, questions, comments, anything, please unmute yourself and join the discussion with us.
Crickets. I'll ask a question. Out of the poems that you weren't familiar with, is there any poem that particularly stood out to anybody?
Rosalie, unmute yourself here.
Yeah, I love Backyard. I thought that was so fun, and it was definitely the story of a kid who's always told to be good and really tries to always be good, but she's always watching those other children, and they're having so much fun, and you're wondering, gee whiz, I would love to do that. I mean, I grew up in a family where you really had to be good because everybody was watching you. And boy, did I wish I could have been like everybody else and doing all of those mischievous things. So thank you for reading that poem. It was a delight.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
I had a question, Ms. Blakely. It was really a gift to hear you read We Real Cool. And as you were reading it, I was thinking about how sometimes reading a poem aloud might be a different experience from reading it on paper. And I wondered if your mother talked to you about how to read her poems aloud, or coached you, or so that we could receive it in the way she had intended.
Not so much coached me, but my mother took me around to different readings, not only hers, but of other people, Michael Ananias, so many other different writers, and I got a chance to go to some poetry conferences like the National Poetry Festival in, oh good heavens, what was that, 63 or 62? And got a chance to meet different writers. I got a chance to meet John Ciardi, Robert Frost, Langston Hughes, who my mother and father had known, but I didn't. And they gave a little, and he in fact gave me, it was near Halloween, he gave me a little orange plastic pumpkin with a little plastic tiger in it that was, and candy. Of course, the candy's long gone. I think that there is still, the pumpkin still exists somewhere. But I listened to them reading, and everybody can't recite their poetry in a performance kind of way. But my mother and several others could, and I listened to them. And so and I've been told since I was a teenager that my voice sounds a little, that sounds like my mother's. And there are certain things that I can still hear her do. And so when I get to places, that We Real Cool is how she would do it when she would read the title. So yeah. So I listened, I paid attention, and some of it I still try to capture.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I'd just like to say thank you for a most wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Yes, I don't have a question, but I would like to state that for me, this has been a wonderful session and will take on new meaning to me as I reflect in the coming days and weeks. Just a wonderful session. I'm so glad to have listened to it. So thank you all, anybody participating.
Thank you so much. And if you'd like, if anybody's interested, what I can send Michael a list of the poems and quotes that I read in the in the presentation. So okay. So yeah, I'd be happy to do that.
That would be really lovely. Thank you.
So I know you don't want to keep going back to We Real Cool, but I just want to say that I've read that for decades and I never read it so the we connected the way you read it, and it just transforms the poem. I mean, it's fascinating to have heard it, and now I'm going to have to go and look at it again. Because I always made it a sentence, and not the punctuate the end. It just transforms it. Right. Particularly the last line. Right. It just makes that last line pop in a whole other way. It's just fascinating how reading makes such a difference. Yeah. So this is fantastic.
I'm on a world mission to get everybody to do the poem with the way my mother intended, and there's only been one exception, and that is that Eve L. Ewing and Nate Marshall worked together with Manual Cinema for a piece that was produced by the Poetry Foundation, and you can still find it on the Poetry Foundation's website. And it's an animated feature about 5 or 6 minutes long of We Real Cool. and Jamila Woods and her sister sing the song. And when they sing it, they do it just with the rhyme intent. But it is such an awesome song that it's like, okay, I can live with it for this particular.
Yeah, I have a general question. I'm not a real big fan of poetry, but I'd like to know what your feelings are about what is the status of poetry in the US in terms of popularity now? Is it increasing, the same, or?
I think all of the above. I think it's increasing. I think it's decreasing, and I think it's the same. And the reason that I say that is because there are certain styles of poetry that have gotten very popular. Spoken word, for instance, is extremely popular, and it's also become something that a lot of teen groups like Louder Than a Bomb and other groups are doing, sometimes individually and sometimes as teams. They do spoken word pieces. And I think that's wonderful. That sounded like there was a but. There is a but. I think that's wonderful. But I do think it's also important to go and look at poems that were crafted for the written word, because a lot of times people, writers, set up their line breaks and they tell you what they want you to pay attention to based on the writer's line breaks. Very good point. So yes, so I think that there has been a lessening of popularity of some written works, but a general gaining of popularity of poetry as expression.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would like to say at this point, and I'm looking at the book that Nora and I talked about earlier, which was beautifully crafted. It's called Children Coming Home, and Nora and her mother worked on it. And it is a gorgeous piece of printed poetry because, and you can't see this very clearly, I'll try to hold it up to the camera, but the lines, the spacing, everything about it, the amount of blank space on the page is carefully crafted. And that is part of written poetry that I think we're losing. I hear what Nora is saying about spoken poetry, about the spoken word, but I am old-fashioned and have a great feeling for the printed word. So anyway, I think that's part of the discussion tonight. And now I'm gonna go back to, I see we have a couple of questions in chat. One of which is, where did she used to live in Hyde Park? Well, in Hyde Park, Gwendolyn Brooks lived in the building that I live in. She lived about 6 stories down from where I live in apartment 2A. I live in apartment 9A. And we're in East Hyde Park. We're looking over the lake. It's in some ways a very poetic building. It's certainly a poetic view, but it's also a very, what I would call middle-class building. It's a modest building. The apartments are not large or ostentatious, but we have something of a community here. And at some point, Gwendolyn Brooks was part of that community, not only of East Hyde Park, but of the entire South Side and of the entire city of Chicago, and even broader than that. So that's the answer to that question, which is probably more than I should have said. But the second question I see in chat is, will this be available to watch again later? Yes, we are recording this session with Nora's permission, and hopefully in the next few days I will have it edited and it will be up on our website. And to any of you who registered for this session, you will get a notification and a link as to the availability of the session. So.
I have a question. Is oh, in terms of the book that you held up, what's the name again?
Which
It's called
Seasons? Seasons?
which one?
The last one you said Children Coming Home. Was that not a book or?
Children,
Oh,
yeah, Children
Coming Home
This book-
is,
Yes. Is that a collection of poetry of her poetry or?
it's probably out of print, but the last book that was published posthumously in Montgomery has all of Children Coming Home in it.
Okay.
So that whole collection is in here. And the thing also that you should know about this book is that although it was published in 2003, that it was all of the work that my mother had put together. She planned this book. She wrote new pieces for it. She had other pieces like In the Mecca is in here as well, and Children Coming Home. But she planned this book. She worked out fundamentally the layout, everything of how she wanted the line breaks and so forth of the poems to go. And so this book, although it came out 3 years after she passed, is very much her book, you know. So that's in Montgomery. And so, yeah.
Yes, and all of these titles are in the bibliography that we sent out with the notification. And if any of you didn't get it, I will be happy to send it to you. Certainly many of these books are readily available in print now. Some of them aren't, but anyway, you can contact
I would just
me.
like to comment that those poems that look especially poetic in print, as opposed to when we talked about reading, those things that in print take on a special kind of poetry they call the pietry of print. And I've always liked putting those two words together, pietry and print. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam, our local sage. And by the way, for those of, Nora, you probably don't know Sam. So I'm going to introduce you, Nora Blakely. This is Sam Gard. Sam is our neighborhood muse and poet. He is regularly on something called Good Neighbors, which is our local chat room for Hyde Parkers. And Sam has delighted us over the years with his comments and poetry, and has been a staunch supporter of the book club. And so, Sam, we're delighted to have you back.
Yes, I finally
Sam.
joined the Historical Society after attending for a quarter of a century. It turns out that Carol Veit pointed out I never joined. So I have this year. I'm a member for the first time, legitimately.
Well, Sam, all those years as president, I couldn't convince you, but Carol finally did. So thank you for joining. Okay. All right. Do we have any other questions for Nora?
I do. I saw Paulette's thing, and I do want to say that. I wanted to say a couple of things about Seasons, and that is that Seasons isn't just a collection of some of Mama's poems. It's theme-based. of looking at the different seasons and how different works of hers would fit either through climate or through concept thematically into a particular season. So sure, you might see a poem about snow in the winter section, but you'll also see poems about isolation and rebirth. So, but there's also pieces of the mentors, different peers of my mother's mentors and family. They're all in here, comments about memories of mama. And her book, Young Poets Primer, which isn't just for young poets, which is different tips on writing, is also in here. But most important, this beautiful picture. Jan Spivey Gilchrist did the artwork, but if you go in here, you'll see that that was the original drawing that she used. And that drawing was done, a gift to my mother 3,000 years ago from my uncle, Raymond Brooks. And I have always loved this picture. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful image. And when Jan Spivey Gilchrist saw it, she knew immediately that's what she wanted to do, base her artwork on. And so that's Paulette and Doretha's father. And I just thought he did a phenomenal job on that. So I just had to do that little plug.
All right, I see another question out there about, is it true that Gwendolyn Brooks only wrote one novel, Maud Martha?
Yes, she did write one novel, and when you read it, and I know that it was addressed a couple of years or so ago in the group, but when you read it, you will see that there's a mix of things that actually happened to her in real life and things that absolutely did not happen to her in real life. And in the archives, which are down at the Rare Book and Manuscript Library at University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana, in her archives, there was the beginning of a second book, a sequel to Maud Martha, called, I believe, The Brown Family, if I remember correctly. But that's in the archives down there. But that's the only novel that she completed. But besides poetry, she wrote essays, she wrote, and there are a couple of excerpts from Maud Martha in Seasons as well. But she wrote essays, critical reviews, and of other work, and just about anything. She edited anthologies, just about anything you can think of in the writing field, any category. She tried her hand at.
Well, I would have to just go back to Maud Martha for a moment because I read it several years ago. I was so impressed by the fact that it was actually a very poetic novel, very lyrical. It reminded me in many ways of Marcel Proust, which is getting kind of out there in the literary arcane world. But it was so poetic and so almost musical in the rhythm and the balance of the writing that I was surprised she never tried it again, because to me it was a very moving experience to read that. They call it a novel. I would say it was like a tone poem or something. It was, well, it was what it was, and I found it very beautiful. So
yeah.
All right, we've got other questions out here. Any specific events in Ms. Brooks' young life that particularly influenced her writing?
Wow, so many. Uh, one is that she was a very growing up, well, all of her life, obviously, but particularly in her growing up period in elementary school and high school, she was a very dark-skinned young Black woman at a time that was not popular, and that it was the lighter-skinned girls that were sought after, and so that definitely had an impact on her writing, her view of the world. So there was definitely that. Almost everything that happened to her was grist for the mill. So if you, like I mentioned about Maud Martha, a lot of that is her living in that community and walking down the blocks and seeing some of the different situations that she wrote about. So so yes, it's broad impact.
Oh, she lived in the promontory.
Yes.
Yeah, the question is, how long did Gwendolyn live in the promontory? She was here until 2000. When did she first move here?
Was it? I think it was 93 or 94. I'm not sure.
That sounds about right. Yeah, that sounds about right to me, because I know.
Yeah, I think so.
I think I got here before she did, but I know she was here concurrently. So yeah, so probably 5 or 6 years she lived here. I hope she enjoyed the view.
She loved the view, although on the second floor, she, of course, when the trees blossomed, there wasn't the direct view of the lake, but she was committed to, when she first, because she had lived basically in homes or very short apartment buildings all of her life. And she has what I called, and I don't think Mom ever saw this movie, but she has what I referred to as towering inferno syndrome. She was committed. She had heard someplace that the firefighters could really only get up to like the 6th floor. And so she wasn't going anywhere. She wanted to be on like the 2nd or 3rd or whatever floor. She wasn't thinking about being any higher than that, so, and I don't think my father cared one way or the other, so it wasn't a big topic. So.
Interesting. All right, do we have any other questions for Nora while we have her here? I mean, this has been such a delightful evening. All right, well, Nora, it has been a delightful evening, and I want to thank you so much for all of us for joining us tonight and bringing your mother's works alive. Your reading of them was really touching and moving, and I think it helped all of us understand better about where your mother was coming from in her works. I know that I don't know if you know this, but our archives at the Hyde Park Historical Society are over at Special Collections Research Center in Regenstein Library. And as you go into the locker room, because you can't go into the reading room with anything except paper and pencil. No notebooks, no briefcases, nothing. Mm-hmm. So you have to stash all your stuff in the locker room. And your mother's poem is right there in the wall in the locker room. So every time I would go to Regenstein Library, I would see that poem right there on the wall. And I kept wondering, what is this? You know, why is this here? And you have showed that to me tonight, and I think to all of us, how important that was. And I know you have said that that was one of your mother's early poems, but certainly it made its mark on all of us. And so anyway,
wonderful.
thank you so much. Thank you so much, Nora, for being with us tonight. We've had a wonderful time. This session has been recorded. I will do a little editing on it tomorrow and hopefully get it posted in the next few days. And so anybody who is registered for this session should get an announcement that it is available for viewing. So unless we have, let me see, any last question? Okay. We do have a question from Paulette Brooks. This question comes from a struggling writer. How was Gwendolyn initially recognized as an up-and-coming poet writer? How did break in and be recognized as a successful poet?
She just kept plugging away. I mean, this was a woman who was seriously, seriously committed. Even as a child, her mother and father let her get out of certain chores in the house so that she could keep writing. I mean, and so everybody in the family, my grandmother took her around when she heard that a writer was coming into town, so that she introduced my mother to James Weldon Johnson and
Wow.
to Langston Hughes. And so she kept writing and writing, and she made her own little chapbooks when she was a teenager and just sent her stuff everywhere. She was published in The Defender and in Highlights for Children. And this was her job. This was her life work. And so she put tremendous energy into it. You know, the modern day comparison would be if you're self-publishing a book, all of the work that you have to put into it. Some people think it's very easy, or I'll just self-publish a book, but you could get it published, but it'll just sit there. If you want it to be seen, if you want people to hear about it and stuff, it is a tremendous amount of work. And that's the kind of effort that she put into it. And she read everything, so that she could improve her writing style.
Huh.
And Nora, did she, I mean, you talk about she kept submitting things, she worked at it, did she get a lot of rejection notices?
Oh yeah.
Do you know?
Yeah.
And she had to, I mean, in the old days, I'm old enough to remember this, and you're about my age, so I think you do too. When you submitted things, you had to include a self-addressed stamped envelope and a return envelope if you wanted your manuscript back. Did your mother go through all that?
Yes, and even the books that people were interested in, there were things about in the Mecca at first. At first, in the Mecca was pretty much going to only be the Mecca poem, and then Harper felt that wasn't a solid enough book, and so she wrote the other poems, the After Mecca section. In A Street in Bronzeville, The Mother, the poem about abortion, which my mother was always very careful and committed to making sure that did not take a particular side in the abortion issue. And to this day, when we grant at Brooks Omissions, when we grant licensing for that poem, we have people submit how they're using it and to show us the context. And if we see that they're not using it to make a point on either side, then we give them permission to use it. But there were people, including Richard Wright, who thought that that poem should not go in the book. And so even books that had made it over the first hurdles, you know, still there were issues of content. So yeah.
All right, well, we have one final question, which we've kind of dodged around all evening long, but how was she selected for the Pulitzer Prize?
Her work was submitted, but when it came down to it, they were looking at like 3 or 4 different writers. And frankly, some people were not excited about the idea of this Negro writer getting the Pulitzer Prize. And some of the people just felt that that it was a niche book that a broader spectrum would not be interested in. In fact, there were people, and this is all documented someplace, but there were people who actually pushed for Robert Frost getting his 4th Pulitzer Prize instead of her getting that first one. And so there was controversy, but Annie Allen won out, and so then she got the Pulitzer Prize. You know, so.
All right. Well, thank you again. I think this concludes a really magical evening of literary discussion. And yes, we thank you, Nora, for joining us and for sharing with us everything about your mother. And
thanks to everybody who came out, or rather stayed in, and and got online to watch. I really appreciate your input and participation and listening ears. So thank you very much. So
all right, thank you, Nora. And thank you, book club members. We hope to see you next month. I'll be sending out information about our next book club meeting. And by the way, we will be doing David Axelrod's book, Believer. So look for information about that. And again, thank you all for joining us. I will be sending out information about where you can view the video of tonight's really wonderful performance. So thank you all again, and good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Good night.